The concept of note taking has been around forever. I use it as a classroom teacher. I'm sure everybody here, their classroom teachers use note taking. But the problem with that, research is showing that the students are really just passively recording that information. And it's fine if you're just trying to preserve the information, but that's not really the focus, right? We want the kids to focus on what's being delivered, especially the high school teacher who's delivering that content. We want them to focus on that and then to organize it in a way that makes sense to them. But it's not working, right? Kids are either just copying down word for word what the teachers are saying and they're not really processing, or they're trying to do both and they give up because they're not being able to do either. Or students like me, when I was in school, was like, I'm not taking notes because I'm never going to look at them again. So the concept of note making makes it more engaging, more personal to the student. So that's where we're going to frame tonight's conversation around academic rigor and things like that. So we have just a couple things to share, and then we're going to open it up to hear you and some other teachers, like what's working in your classroom.
I can chime in. One of the things that I used to do and I loved was running book clubs in my classroom, specifically fiction book clubs. And during that time, I would have this group of students who really understood the meaning of where the book was heading, but they were guessing along the way. Like they were making predictions without actually reading and knowing what was coming next. So we worked on synthesizing and what that means. And as a fourth grader, that's a really hard concept for them to understand and wrap their brain around. So I gave them this bookmark. We talked about like what synthesizing means. And then I gave them a similar note taking that you just showed, Kristen, from Building Thinking Classrooms, where it was like a one pager and they had to fill out like what they knew already before reading the next chapter, and then what they learned from the book, and then now what new thoughts they had. And it was like a 3-part organizer for them. And then they had to come back to our next meeting in the book club having those filled out. And it really made them pause and think, because they were my higher flyers and they thought they knew what was coming. But then when they actually thought about it, they came to new conclusions that they didn't have before.
I can share one thing that I was thinking about earlier, and I feel like my brain is so focused into math, and that's what came to myself earlier. I was actually thinking about some of the things that we've done around questioning and things that we've worked with teachers with over the last couple years, Amy, Meg, and I. And one of the books that we have, or I have on my shelf, is Productive Math Struggle by John Sangiovanni. And he has this whole section, it's awesome, about ways you can modify tasks to increase rigor. And some of them are as simple as just changing the focus. So rather than giving them 4 division problems to solve, it's which of these division problems results in a quotient greater than 3. So changing the focus around it. It could be opening the question up so that instead of trying to find one answer, you're trying to find as many answers as you can think of. And some of them are writing about it or finding patterns, or that justifying, leaning really into our math practices. Those are some ways that I know that the 3 of us have worked with some teachers on, and just a lens of how can we shift the question or the task that we're doing in a small way, where you don't have to throw out the whole task, but a small shift can really lift the level of rigor for your students and make them think a little bit deeper.
Thinking about how anytime we can make the student the makers of meaning in the classroom, whether that's the sketchnoting or the type of question that you ask or the type of note-making template. I feel like when I'm having conversations with teachers, it's us trying to think, okay, they're going to do this reading. How can they get the meaning out of it? They're going to watch this video. How can they get the meaning out of it before we tell them what we want them to get out of it? So whether that's through a discussion or through what kind of notes they're going to take and things like that, or just things that I'm thinking about. And just to speak to the sketchnoting a little bit, Karen, if it's something that you're interested in, there's a book, it's called Ink and Ideas. It's more of it doesn't necessarily lean into the research as much as it's a practical guide to helping kids learn how to sketch notes. So use bold, fat arrows for this or things like that to emphasize important ideas. We've been using that at the middle school a little bit for teachers that, similar to the projects that Amy showed for one pagers to synthesize learning, whether that's, we just learned our ancient Middle Eastern unit in their 6th grade social studies class. So they're going to do a one pager around conflict or something like that. And they draw it in the sketch notes, and the kids are amazing. What they come up with is just amazing. And a cool avenue for our artistic kids to really shine. It's amazing what they come up with. So huge fan of the sketchnoting.
Yeah, I was also going to add to that, Kate. Kara has a teacher this year, her history teacher, who's just amazing. And one of the things she does with the kids to make their own meaning is they have to answer questions about the reading. So it's a 3-column thing. And the first column's the question, and then they do the reading and they answer the question. And then they go to class and she does a lecture or a learning activity. And then they go back and they answer the same question after class. And it is phenomenal. I just see her answers and I see what she got out of the reading, which is good. It answers it. I often read it with her and she answers it well. But then seeing the meaning that she's able to make and go back and answer those same questions, I just thought that was great. I don't see a lot of high school secondary things being down in Concord, but I was like, that could work in 3, 4, and 5 in a more modified, smaller way. But I thought that was a great way to increase the rigor without having to do a dog and pony show. It's not a ton of extra work on your part. It's just switching things around a little bit and having the kids make that meaning.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes at the secondary level, and this is definitely not a knock in any way, but teachers become accountable to their content. So they get nervous that the kids need to know this thing for whatever test, whether it's a standardized assessment or the common midterm that they have to take or whatever it may be. They feel really accountable to that. But it's okay, so let's do that. But then also, how can we make sure that they get that thing that you need them to get, but also give them the reins to get there, kind of a thing?
Kate, as a secondary teacher, I always fell into the trap of thinking rigor means more. I would just give a ton of work thinking it was more rigorous, right? When obviously that's not the case. In terms of notes, reading through the Building Thinking Classrooms book, this particular chapter, I was thinking back, man, I did everything wrong. I used to collect the notebook in hopes that it would encourage students to take the notes, and I would have the guided notes with the fill in the blank. So every student's notes looked exactly the same, or they had points deducted. So it was everything opposite of having students make them for their future forgetful selves, which I love that phrasing. And that's really the purpose, right? For students to own that learning and take notes that are more personalized and relevant to them. I think in the secondary, you're right. We focus so much on content and trying to deliver that in a way that all students can understand it. But by doing that, I think we're not achieving our goals because we're not making it relevant and personalized to all of the students. Now, I know that's changed since I was in the classroom, but I think it's still the case in some areas.
Sam, I'm thinking about the ways that I took notes growing up too. All of my notes were very guided by the teacher, or I wrote down every single word they said and had stress about it if I missed something. So I just think too, if we can find ways to make it more meaningful for students where they can have ownership of it and have a way that works for them, starting as young as elementary school, as they go up through secondary and then into college, how much better equipped they're going to be to make meaning from what they're learning in their classes or wherever they go next, so that they aren't lost without a fill in the blank template or a very guided notes where the teacher says, write this down, thinking about, we're always preparing them for the future that we don't know what it's going to be like yet. If we can help them make meaning on their own and have ownership of them, we're going to just set them up for success much more than we all probably were growing up.
I also think too that the idea of sketchnoting and making meaning when learning requires a deeper listening skill that I think a lot of our students are often passively listening as they're sitting. And there's a lot of research done in Peter's book about the vertical surfaces. And that's been a hot topic right now that we're talking about, getting students out of their seats to think more. And I think when they are making meaning with their own notes and creating those notes, it's requiring them to listen more to what's being delivered rather than just looking for the word. Because I know I was guilty of that for sure in high school and college, just listening for that key word that came before the blank. So I knew when to fill in that part of the note. And it didn't really have any meaningful impact on my learning. So I do think that the listening skill involved with this will definitely help students more too.
Well, and same with the reading task. I think we're all probably guilty of you just hunt and peck for the word that you just fill in the blank with. Everyone's done that.
Well, and Kate, I also, when we were thinking about this ed talk tonight being around rigor, and I just kept thinking too about some of the TDA stuff that I've learned from you, that we talked with some of the teachers about, and Meg, you too. We have to give them a chance to experience the rigor of what a TDA is. Of course, we want to give them differentiated text on their levels and stuff, but all of the work that I know you've done a lot at the middle school, Kate, around TDAs and lifting the rigor of what they're doing in small bites along the way leading up to doing a full TDA, it really sets kids up for success to be able to tackle those types of tasks.
One of the things I remembered when I was thinking about this topic tonight was in 4th grade one year, we did graphic essays. So it was like around that time of year where we were focused on TDA a little bit and working on essays. And what we actually had them do was sketch out an essay with a theme based on a couple of texts that they were reading and find some evidence and find some examples, but then express it on a big white piece of paper and use symbols, and you could use phrases or you could use quotes. But it makes me think about how on one hand, sketchnoting helps the reader or the student make sense, but then it can also be a way to communicate your thinking. And so you can be really intentional about the quotes that you pick out and the symbols that you choose to use so that you can communicate, this is what I think the authors of these books were trying to teach me, or something like that. And thinking about them in the future as citizens, yes, we want people to be able to communicate and read pieces of text, but I think we also get a lot of information visually, and having them think about how can I communicate this efficiently with words and visuals is an important life skill.
Conversation interesting, because I have to be honest, when we do writing about reading, it's a lot of prompts, and the prompts are almost always based on PSSA. They're not based on whether there's true understanding, but can you follow this model to get it through, which I have huge issues with. But I do the sort of trending towards these sort of sketch notes so kids can actually sketch their understanding, and then maybe from there do the writing that comes from it, because then it shows true understanding as opposed to filling in Miss Beck's blanks. You know what I mean? The theme is blank. It can be shown by that kind of.
Karen, I like that idea too, because it shows the kids that the notes that they're taking are meaningful and that they're going to go back and use them at another point in time. So many times in my classrooms, kids would take the notes and then they would put them in their folder and never go back to them. But the way you just explained it, it would reinforce the purpose of the notes.
I think too, though, Sam, to what you just said, I think they're more invested, right? As I'm listening to everyone talk, I'm thinking of engagement and ownership. The examples that Amy shared, the examples that Kristen shared, when the kids have the opportunity to think about what they want on that paper or think about what they want to illustrate, I think there's a deeper engagement, which then leads to that deeper rigor. I think when kids have the opportunity to make the choice and the decision, and I also think it helps with memory. I was one of those students that memorized everything, and I was really good at memorizing. And I would just know I could take a spelling test, no problem, because I just had to memorize the letters, right? But I was told to do that. You do it. It's like a rote task, whatever. But when you have the opportunity to build something or create something or make something with your ideas in mind, I think it sticks too. I don't know, just my thoughts. I think of ownership and I think of engagement.
Yeah, I'm thinking too about, not to nerdy, my coaching friends know I could talk about this a lot, but Karen, when you were saying about the response to reading and TDA type writing, it's hard to get kids to that synthesis or analytical level if they can't even demonstrate understanding of the text, the sketchnoting is a really great way to just see, did they get it? Did they get the big ideas? Did they understand and have the biggest takeaways of the text before you get them to dive back in and do whatever response is necessary for that other type of practice?
And Kate, what I was going to say about that is I think as teachers, we're so guilty of, we forget to give them the time and space to think of what they want to say, to think of the analysis, to think of the synthesis. We're so worried about what's your next sentence going to be that they're worried about how to write the sentence when we forgot to even stop them and think, what do we want to say? What should be coming next? And I think by separating it, by having them stop and draw, by do the sketch notes, you're really showing them you're doing two things. You're synthesizing and analyzing, and then you're taking that and writing it. And we tend to make it one big clump a lot of the time due to time and stressors that.
But Amy, to your point, it takes time, right? I remember teaching a 43-minute block when I was in the classroom and really struggled with time, or 43-minute period, I should say. It wasn't even a block, to try to give the time for processing, give the time for note making and talking and discussing, and then running out of time before closing many times for years, just because even to give the kids the processing time and to give the time for the writing takes time, right? It's a really difficult form of synthesis, and to give the kids the time and the space to do that. But it stuck, right? You find that the learning stuck more than it did when I just ran through stuff to get to a closing in the class or things of that nature. So just getting creative, especially if you're in a time crunch, so to speak.
And to take this in a slightly different direction, when I was thinking about Rigor, since I don't have a classroom right now, but I am teaching eSchool, the idea of note taking, I don't know if these kids are taking notes or not because I never see them in person. And I can have them fill in outlines and things like that, which we've done in the past to model a more traditional setting. But what I've started doing is having them find their own articles using AI and building out assignments that way. So the students are prompting AI, they're finding current events from wherever we are studying in the world for non-Western cultures, but then pushing them further to say, okay, now find a vetted resource, a CNN, an Al Jazeera, whatever news outlet you want, and find an article that backs up what the AI has told you. So I'm seeing them finding good information from a bot, but then I'm also finding them vet that information and verify it with traditional media outlets. So I don't know exactly how their note-taking is going. They do have to turn in their summary, which may or may not be written by ChatGPT. I don't know, but hopefully it's not always like that. But then giving their threads when they're prompting back and forth with the bot. So it's giving me a little bit of a peek into their conversations with that resource and showing me that they are diving deeper and having a little bit more rigor instead of just filling in an outline.
And Christine, it jogged my memory when you said eSchool. Our current student that we've been working with, I actually made a blank notebook for him for math because he wasn't taking notes. He wasn't absorbing the information. And so I stapled together a couple pieces of paper. And I told him after a few minutes of watching each Ed puzzle video to give himself permission to pause, take some notes on what he's learned, and then press play. And I think especially at the secondary level, when we're doing a lot more blended coursework and we're recording videos or having students watch videos, making sure that we're giving them the permission to pause and take some notes and think about what they just heard before watching a 6 or 7 minute video, pausing to answer questions, but not really making any meaning of what they just learned and now forgetting it when it comes time for the assessment that follows.
So I am finding that rigor is relative. I do have a handful of students who are on grade level and can do that kind of work. But what I like about the sketchnoting is that it doesn't matter what level you're on. You can sketch your understanding, and it doesn't matter what your neighbor sketches, if that makes any sense. So that's something I really want to try to see, particularly in math and reading, to see if we can get some of that stuff from them to deepen their understanding, because I'm finding retention is a huge issue, not with everybody, but with a certain number of students. And if I can get them to sketch their understanding of math and give them ample time to do it because we're always so rushed for time. So if I can break out a certain amount of time to have them sketch their understanding, even if it is that I do something a little bit different with I'm really intrigued to see if that helps. Sketch your understanding, and then I'll take a look at or take a picture, upload it to Seesaw so I don't have to carry home 20 math notebooks, but I can see sort of their understanding path and what they understand, and then what they think they understand and they really don't understand, and how I can redirect that in small groups over the next few days. That's something when I was thinking about it, I was thinking this is something I can do whole class, because my high kids will sketch something completely different from those non-readers. I have 3 non-readers. They don't read. They read on, at best, a first grade level, but they can draw pictures from things that I have talked about. That's something I want to try. Clearly, it's not going to be tried this week, but
you're making me think, Karen, about how we can support students to be successful with this. And I'm thinking about all of us sitting here, and Kristen and Amy started us off with all these examples. And even though it is making their own meaning, I think seeing examples would be really helpful of what this work could look like. Or I'm thinking about a 3rd grade class, a lot of you who are reading biographies, and if you did some sketching for a person's life and then that poster lived somewhere as an example, and then they're all reading biographies, they can go back to that anchor and be like, oh, did I include something about the childhood? Was there something important there? What are they known for? That was something that was in the example. Do I have that in mind yet? I think while blank paper is important for them to make their own meaning, sometimes it can be hard to get started, and examples or anchor posters.
And I do think, particularly, I have always found that some of the kids that struggle are very comfortable creatively, artistically, that kind of stuff. Not always. Some of them hate art and hate reading and hate everything else. But I have found that a strong percentage of them would love to express their understanding with pictures, sketches, that type of stuff.
I was just going to say, even for take 1 day, and instead of the exit ticket, have them do a quick sketch note, just 1 day, and see how it goes. Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
It doesn't have to be a huge project.
That.
You can just,
sometimes the exit ticket actually says, tell us what you learned.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but now that I have a new way of having them express what they learned, that becomes an important exit ticket. If I say draw, or I change the directions, which I can do, it becomes then a much more differentiated answer to the question, because you don't have to write words. I don't have to say, Miss Beck, how can you spell? How do you spell? How do you spell? Just draw a picture. You know what I mean? That it takes the spelling issue out of it. It takes all of that out of it, and they can just sketch it. Now, I would leave it open for students who would prefer to write. I'm okay with that. I probably would have been one of those, because my artistic ability is limited at best, but I'm a good writer, so I would probably have written it. Do you know what I mean? So I think it is, I don't think sketching notes would have worked for me, but I think it will work for a significant number of students if you give them the option to just write as well.
Karen, I think that's so important. And we talk about this when we do our training for EDI and theme 4, and we lean on UDL, the multiple means of representation and multiple means of engagement, giving students choice about how we're assessing their learning. It doesn't matter, right, if we're accepting an essay that was written or typed or a sketch, right? If they can show that they learned the concepts that we're trying to deliver, that's what we're looking for as teachers. So I love where you're going with this, and offering students multiple ways to show their learning. I think you're going to see great success, and we're here to do that. Right? But thank you for making time to be here. Amy and Kristen, thank you for your presentations on note making. Karen, thank you for being here again and contributing to the conversation. And the other coaches and Julie, thank you so much.